ignorance here at this point, but even though you were the script editor during this time, I don't know what a script editor does. Could you enlighten me?
Yeah, script editor is responsible for getting in the scripts. Now, television works very much to timetables and deadlines. And the important date for a script editor is when the director joins. You know who was a series of serials, like a string of sausages, you know, each one. Each of those had a different director and a different staff of people, and except for the regulars, the Doctor and the companions, a different cast, you see. So, but the main feature of that is the director, who is responsible for the shaping of the whole show. When the director joins, you know, and he is expensive, and he brings with him a whole team of highly expensive professional people. Cameramen, lighting, makeup, costume, special effects, a whole gang of people, you see, all of which you're paying for. If he hasn't got a set of scripts, he can't start working. He can't do anything, you see. So they're all sitting there twiddling their thumbs at vast expense, you know, eating you out of house and home, as it were. And the problem is, for the script editors, to get the scripts in on time. I went to a big meeting years and years ago, in my early days at the BBC, where they were discussing all the problems, you know, and why they had overspends and why shows were bad and why things went wrong. And time again, it came down to one problem: late scripts. You see, if you had 6 good scripts to give the director when he arrived, in a perfect world, as it were, then he wouldn't have much time. You know, he'd be under pressure even so. Imagine what it is if you haven't got 6 scripts, or if or perhaps you haven't got any. Barry says that when he joined as director on a show called Enemy of the World, they got 1, you know, and there's not a lot he could do with that. And the rest came in, and he said they were all terrible as they came in, you know. Anyway, they came to this conclusion, this big meeting, that late scripts were the problem, and somebody at the back said wearily, and then are they any bloody good when you get them? So, you know, what a script editor's job is, good scripts in on time. So that means, another expression I use a lot is lead time, which is the time you use before you go into production, the pre-planning time, which you never get enough of. And it's very important to use that and to start getting the scripts in. Thing about writers, you know, and I speak as a lifelong writer myself and script writers, is they are devious, treacherous, unreliable bastards. You know, I mean, they'll tell you they finished when they barely started. You know, don't believe a word they say. And my advantage as a script editor, having been a writer, is that I knew all the excuses because I'd used them all myself in my time, you know, so I was deeply sceptical. And in fact, I recently went to do a DVD commentary, and they dug out the production files, you know, with lots of letters and memos, a show called Planet of the Daleks, and there was one from me to Terry Nation. And Terry had said, well, I'll just do the scripts and I'll send you in all 6, you see. And I'd written back saying, no, you won't, Terry, you will give them to me one at a time. Because I said, it gives me a sense of security. You know? And, you know, Terry was a very eminent writer, you know. I mean, he was, you know, the man who created the Daleks. But, you know, trust nobody is the thing, you know. And get the scripts in, you know, and that means, you know, being involved with the writer, helping him, nudging him along. And then when the scripts come in, you give them to the director. You know, well, let's say you actually managed to get a set of scripts to give to the director. Director reads them and says he doesn't like them. He can't afford it, it costs too much, his budget isn't big enough, and this isn't working. Then the actors get them and they don't like them either. Jon Pertwee doesn't like them. It's all too complicated and difficult, and the lines are hard to say, you know. And you just slog your way through all these things, and somehow the show gets on the screen, you know, and you nourish and nurse and urge the scripts along till you get through the final stages of production. It's an immensely important job, and it's a job with. The problem is that you are not in the chain of command, which goes from producer to director. Producer's the big ultimate boss, then the director, and then the people on do. The script editor's a little to one side. And I've known script editors who sort of cringed about like whipped dogs, but I am not easily pushed about, and it's two things. It's very much what you make it, and I was always, I always stood up for myself. And secondly, Barry and I were best friends, and everybody knew that. And basically, if I said anything, they knew, if there was any trouble, it was very likely that Barry would back me. And also, as Barry got busy with other things, I would occasionally stand in for him, So although Barry was always the producer and always the boss, I was like a fairly important number two, and I had a reasonable sort of position, And that helped me, to get things through.
Now, just suppose, for example, I did a Sam Taylor and supposedly saw you in 1973 with a fantastic script called Warmonger about humans, draconians and Cybermen fighting together against this mysterious force in the future. Apart from thinking, good story for a book, I must publish it in 30 years' time, how would you set about deciding if it was good enough to be produced or go into production? What sort of things would or wouldn't be looking for?
Well, the first thing, of course, is always the practicalities. Can we afford it? Can we do it within the budget? Can we do the special effects? I mean, you couldn't do Warmonger, you see, because it's a space opera with battles in, which you couldn't afford. You'd have to narrow it down. I mean, Planet of the Daleks, which we did recently, which I saw reviewed recently, is a kind of space opera. But what you've got there is the Doctor and Joe and a handful of shipwrecked fowls on a planet with Daleks, and there aren't that many people about. That was a relatively modest show in terms of budget, you see. So you look first of all for the practicalities, because if you can't afford it, you can't do it. Secondly, will it sustain for whatever length it's been put in for? If it's a 4-parter, that's usually not so much of a problem. 6-parter, you've really got to have a good, strong story that's going to carry you. 7-parter, you're in trouble whatever you do, because 7-parters are impossible, And we did 3 in our first year, and they were all a nightmare. So is it a good, strong story? Is it about something? Not just a kind of chase about up and down the corridors and escaping through the air vents and whatever, we didn't used to do, as it were, message stuff or political drama or anything like that, but important themes, if the writer's got anything to him, his ideas and what he feels about life will come out in the story, So has it got any kind of depth to it? So it's a whole combination of things, really, And do I know the writer? Can I trust him? Will he get the scripts in on time? So it's a lot of. It's not only one thing. It's a whole lot of things. A gestalt, as I think they say.
Now, after Who, of course, you went on to write for the Target range, and yet again another ignorant time again for myself. Were there many novelisations of Who stories around during this time? How did you become involved, and could it be argued that you were the driving force behind the books?
I was sort of. What had happened was this. In the early days, they'd done 3 or 4 Doctor Who books, which had been published in hardback, because paperbacks hadn't been invented, basically. And they'd not made much impact, nobody cared. One of them was by David Whittaker about Daleks, and Bill Strutton, the Zarbi. There were 3, I think. I can never remember them all.
I think it was Crusades, wasn't it?
Yep, Crusades sounds very like. Yeah, that's right. Those have been published, made no impact whatsoever. Right. Years and years later, a chap called Richard Henwood joins a small firm called Tandem Books, and they want to start a children's range, which they call Target Books. And what you do, apparently, as I learned from Richard, is you go around looking for already published stuff you can buy up cheap. And Richard went to these, I think they're White Lion publishers, and said, you know, what have you got? And they said, well, there's these 3 Doctor Who books, you know, they never did much, but you can have them cheap if you like. So Richard thought, well, you know, I mean, and these were just 3 books amongst lots of other books he was commissioning and getting off the ground, you see, doing a whole children's list. But he published the 3 Doctor Who books in paperback with nice, snazzy covers, and they sold like hotcakes. So he thought, I'm onto a good thing here, you see, being no fool. And he then turned up at the Who office. No, he first went to the BBC and got a licence to novelise Doctor Who, you see, which you had to do. Who is owned by the BBC because it was created by people working for the BBC, and it's in-house copyright, as we say. Whereas some shows are owned by the writer who invented them and sold them to the BBC. But who is BBC? So he got permission from the BBC to do it. He then turned up at the Doctor Who office and said, I need more Doctor Who books immediately. Who's going to write them? And never having written a book in my life, I said, I will. I said, very cheerfully. And he commissioned the first one, which was the first Pertwee story, Spearhead from Space. And he said, I don't like that title, Spearhead from Space. We'll call it the Auton Invasion, you know, and it just shows what small bit, how unimportant they were, you know. They didn't like the title, they changed it. I mean, all this changed later on, but in the early days it was like that. And so I wrote this first book, and as I've explained, you see, I was a bit late with it because I'd still got my Who work as well, you know, my Who script editing work. And I was a bit late with it, so instead of posting it, I took it round to the publishers myself. And one of these terribly nice upper-class girls you always get in English publishing, usually called Caroline, and she turned up to get it and said, oh, you bought it round yourself, how kind, and so early. Thank you very much. And I thought, I am on a good thing here. I thought, you know, this is not like television. And you know, it is a bit more relaxed because, you know, if you're publishing a book, all you're waiting to is publish the book. You haven't got about 50 people, you know, gathered around to help you publish it. So I gave it in, went away, and heard nothing for weeks and weeks, you see. And I thought, well, they hate it, obviously. They've decided they're not going to do it. And I phoned up this editor, Richard Henwood, and said, what about the book? And he said, oh, that's gone off to the publishers. He said, what are we going to do next? And I sort of got launched into doing them and into being, having, you know, I suppose just got my foot in the door first, you see, no other particular reason. I got to be a sort of unofficial editor. You know, Richard would say, what shall we do? And I would say, what about so-and-so? And in the beginning, there were a handful of us who were doing them. But gradually everybody dropped out but me. And the reason was that the book money was very small, in those days certainly, compared to television money. And television script... So I would ask people if they wanted to novelise their own scripts, you see, basically. And for a while people did, and then they got fed up with it and they stopped doing it, you know, so it became all me. And I did enough of them so that it became lucrative. And then, of course, they all took off and became bestsellers over the years, you know. And I had this brief period in life when it rained money on me. Large cheques were arriving by every post. But, and there's a huge but in this was untaxed money. This is the trap all freelancers fall into. The money you get is... a large chunk of it is going to the government in due course. I mean, I remember ages ago, I had a very nice Indian accountant called Mr. Shah, and, you know, he knew about these troubles, and a lot of things came together, and I got a cheque for £10,000, and I thought, right, you know, wonderful, I'm rich. And Mr. Shah said, now, Mr. Dix, you must say to yourself, how lucky I am to have this £6,000 for being for the government, you see. And I said, if I could have ever have done that, you know. And so what happened after that is that after the money started, you know, the money began to tail off and the enormous tax bills started coming in, you know. I always say I was nearly ruined by being rich. And it took me several years to get back on an even keel, you know, and I did put a bit more aside, you know, so that I could meet the tax bills when they came. But that, you know, people have, I mean, Dennis, and that famous actor called Dennis Price, he was literally ruined by that, you know. Never put any tax money aside. Then he got colossal great bills, you see. And, you know, most people, they take it out your wage packet, you know, and you grumble and curse, but you don't have to worry about it at least. But if they give you the lot and rely on you saving it up, you're in trouble, you know, unless you're a lot better with money than I am, which is not very good at all, you know. So anyway, but that was fine, you know, it sorted itself out in the end. And for a long, long time, I did pretty well all the Who books. And they would say to me, you know, which ones do you want to do, and which ones do you want to find somebody else to do. So I was kind of, you know, the driving force, as you say, and the unofficial editor. And then gradually over the years, I always used... The thing about the novelisations, you know, not everybody realises, is that you split the money 50-50 with the writer of the original script, which is only fair, you know, because you're working from his script. So I used to say to writers, look, I do all the work, you get half the money. And many of them sort of fell for this, you see. And then later on, people thought, hang on, if I do all the work, I could have all the money. And so more and more people wanted to novelise their own scripts, you know. So gradually that tailed away, but not before I'd done, I think, 64 of them over the years, which is a hefty handful. I don't think anybody's ever going to catch that up, you know. Now.
What was your favourite novelisation?
Oh, it's very hard. It would depend a bit. I mean, there's a story called Image of the Fendal that I liked very much, and if I like the script, there's a lot of pleasure in doing the book, you know. There's a certain amount of pleasure in doing a rotten script, because you think, well, this is a load of old rubbish, but I can turn it into a decent book, you know. Sometimes felt I could do that. And there's a couple of very strange stories by a Buddhist writer called Kinder and Snake Dance. And again, I liked those very much. They were weird, quirky stories, and I enjoyed doing the books. So, but out of so many, you know, you couldn't pick one, as it were, as a favourite. Robot, I suppose, you know, I would say, or The Five Doctors, you know, but which were from my own script.
Now, I'm just imagining the scene. You get up, you go to the writing desk, and see a 6-part, 1,000-page script waiting to be novelised. How do you condense it into a book, and how do you decide what subplots to keep in and what subplots to keep out?
Well, I always saw my job as a noveliser of turning the show into a book.
Yeah.
You know, putting what was on the screen into the pages of the book. And the thing to remember is that when I started doing them, this was before the days of video, let alone, you know, DVD. And also, there were only the standard 3 or later 4 channels. And there were no repeats. You know, we didn't have all the stuff we have now on digital, you see, all these channels, which is shown, BBC 3, BBC 4. And in those days, if you missed a Doctor Who, you missed it. I mean, you were just never going to see it again. Maybe, you know, the odd Christmas repeat or something like that, once in a blue moon or some special occasion. So the target books took the place, as it were, of the shows that people had missed. That was the only way you could recapture it, was by reading the book. And how, I don't know, I mean, you read it and try and see it in terms of scenes in a book, and of chapters, you see. I mean, mostly target books were 100 double-page spaces of A4 and 12 chapters. So that will be like the framework, and I would, you know, somehow fit the show into that. In the early days, I would have the scripts, and then I would go to the BBC and they would arrange a special showing for me, and I would sit there and take notes and things, because you have to remember, the script is written, obviously, before the show is made. So it doesn't tell you things like what people are wearing, what the actors look like, because it hasn't been, you know, they haven't been cast at that stage, you see. So you need to see the show. Later years, I mean, I've now got a television, a video recorder and DVD player in my office. Yes. And when I do something, I mean, recently, the most recent novelisation I did, which is the first one for a long, long time, out of the blue, they asked me to novelise the first of the new Sarah Jane inventions. the New Year's Day pilot called Invasion of the Bane. And that was the first one I'd done for ages, and it was quite fun to do that. But then, you see, I had the scripts and I had a DVD of the show.
Yeah.
So I could go between script and DVD and then back to the word processor, and kind of condense it all down to getting it onto the page. So it's a kind of it's a technical as well as a creative process, What you want to do is reproduce the feeling of seeing the show by reading the book, and that's what you try to do.